Hey, it's Mike. Thanks for tuning back in. It is Friday, which means Attic Find Friday, and I am wearing my Celtics sweatshirt today because playoffs start tomorrow. I'm really excited about it. Before I get started with today's Attic Find, which isn't technically an Attic Find, we'll get into that. My new pickup is this Mike Greenwell 89 Donruss MVP card, autographed by Greenwell, of course. Greenwell, when I was a kid, I was 10 years old in 1989. He was my favorite player, favorite Red Sox, of course. I was a huge Red Sox fan. And the 89 Donruss was my favorite set. So, love this card, and I saw it on eBay for next to nothing, so I had to have it. All right, let's talk about this one. This is an article that Oliver, my good friend Oliver, sent to me from Sports Collectors Daily. It's a really cool article, and the fact that it takes place in Maine and it's about Maine people makes it even better, since I'm also from Maine, have lived in Maine my entire life. And it fits in the Attic Find rules, which is when you find something unexpectedly, whether it's in an attic or a storage space, or in this case, a old captain's trunk on the side of the road. So Sports Collectors Daily wrote this up just this week, so it's a brand new story, even though it happened 48 years ago. So Dan Adams, who is now 69 years old, at the time he was in his early 20s, he was working the comedy circuit in southwestern Maine, and I'm fairly familiar with southwestern Maine. There's not much of a comedy circuit in Maine at all, let alone southwestern Maine. So I was surprised to hear that in 1975 there was one. It's pretty surprising to me. If you're familiar with that scene in southwestern Maine in the 1970s, let me know. I'm interested in hearing more about this. So he had been actually a teacher in Massachusetts up until a student bashed him over the head with a thermos, and he decided while he was recovering, he was doing comedy. And he just decided he wasn't going to go back to teaching. He wanted to do comedy. And his comedy act was he would play guitar and tell family-friendly jokes, and he would integrate the audience in with his show. Sounds fun. And he was out driving in York County, Maine, one day in 1975. And as he drove by a house, he saw in the driveway a captain's trunk out front waiting for the garbage truck, apparently, to come and pick it up. And he stopped, and he asked the owner, and they said, yeah, give me $15 for it. It seems strange that they were throwing it away and asking for $15, but I might be misunderstanding a little part of the story. So he gave them $15 and he took it home. And $15 seems like a lot, but back then, I don't know how much that would be today, but he got it home and he pulled it out of the car and it fell apart. And he was mad. He really liked the trunk. He wanted to have it, but it just disintegrated effectively. Not really, but he was upset about it. And then he noticed that there were some things inside. It was pretty heavy, but he just thought he would throw away whatever was inside. There were some items wrapped in old newspapers. And one of them was the front page of the November 4th, 1876 front page of Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper. I couldn't find this specific issue or edition of that newspaper, but here's one from 1865. It was a pretty famous newspaper at that time. So wrapped inside there is the first edition copy of Who's Who in Major League Baseball, which was from 1933. And this book basically just highlighted all the best players in baseball at the time, in the early 30s. And you can probably think about a lot of big names from the early 30s. And on the inside cover of the book had all of the National League teams, and you could add autographs by line in each of those. And then in the back cover had all the American League teams, and you could add autographs. And it was loaded with autographs. Every team was full with tons of players. And then inside the book, above the pages of each of the players, those players had autographed their pages. So guys like Babe Ruth, Hank Greenberg had personalized his page to my pal Frankie. So we'll talk about Frankie here in a moment. There was also Lou Gehrig, Dizzy Dean, Jimmy Fox, Rogers Hornsby, and Mickey Cochran, as well as 440 other Major League Baseball players had autographed the book. So one book, Who's Who in Baseball, first edition, 90 years old now today, and at the time it was more than 40 years old. Pretty awesome. And Dan, the guy who pulled them out of this captain's trunk, says that the signatures were phenomenal, and he joked, they must have gone to Catholic school like I did and got beaten up by nuns. Because apparently in Catholic school you had to sign your name beautifully. So the book and a lot of these items belong to Frank Borsa, who was a bat boy in Boston in the 1930s. He had stars sign his book when they came to town. And at the time, Boston was a 2 Major League Baseball team town, the Boston Red Sox and the Boston Braves. And remember, the Boston Braves is where Babe Ruth signed in 1935. He had his final season in Major League Baseball in 1935. I think he batted like 188 that season. He wasn't good, but also he still had some power, still was getting on base. So he probably, in today's game, maybe could have kept playing a little bit longer, would have gotten a bench spot. But he retired after 1935. Back then, there was no memorabilia craze like today. I was just earlier this week reading an article about NBA autograph collectors and how they'll line up at the airport or at a bus station or wherever the team's going to be, even if it's 2 a.m., and they'll just wait for the team to come in and ask them to sign autographs. And a lot of guys are wary of it because, you've got these, who are these weirdos that are asking for autographs at 2 a.m? And this, I think it was in The Athletic that I read this article, and they talked about, they talked to 10 different autograph seekers, and all 10 of them claimed to be collectors. It's hard to believe. And back then, there wasn't a memorabilia craze. If a kid asked you for an autograph, you assumed that kid wanted the autograph. Nowadays, a lot of professional athletes, if they see a kid asking for an autograph, a lot of them assume that kid's father or mother may have put them up to it. It's sad, but that's just the way it is. It's such a huge market that they have to be suspicious. So this young boy, bat boy, could easily just ask hundreds and hundreds of athletes for their autograph. Boston Braves players would come into town, he would ask them, and they'd be happy to give him an autograph. He was a Boston Red Sox bat boy in 1935, and he would just see every major league team, even though they didn't necessarily play for the Red Sox or play against the Red Sox. He was in the town. So pretty cool stuff. Interestingly, in the box, there was some evidence that Borsa was paid $63.36 at the end of 1935 season when the Red Sox won the division. Nobody knows or could tell if he had been paid throughout the season, but that $63 check was worth about $1,400 today. So pretty good payday for a bat boy, plus all these autographs. So other things included in this, there was a letter that Borsa wrote to the Cleveland business manager asking for the owners and general managers' autographs. And they sent that letter back with autographs from the owner and the general manager, and the business manager had autographed it too. And those three were only together between 1935 and 1941 in Cleveland. So it was easy to tell when he had requested the autograph within a 6-year period. They also had scorecards from both Boston teams from the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. Postcards, there were postcards from before 1910, including some from Red Sox player and manager Bill Kerrigan, who won 3 World Series with the Red Sox. Bill Kerrigan was also from Lewiston, Maine, so another Mainer. I grew up not terribly far from Lewiston, maybe 25, 30 minutes. There was a program from Christy Mathewson Day, 1926, the year after Mathewson passed away. The Christy Mathewson Day proceeds, money that they were raising at this fundraiser, were going to build a statue for Christy Mathewson, I guess, some sort of memory of him nearby. There were also Spalding's baseball guides from 1913 through 1930 in this chest. Scorebooks listed from 1914 to 1918. Some of this stuff belonged to a woman named Dolores Mitchell, who had no apparent ties to Borsa. And Sports Collectors Daily did some research into this, and they looked at census records. They couldn't find any tie to Borsa, but she was born in Maine. So they may have crossed paths, they may have known each other. It's unclear how Borsa, the bat boy from the 1930s, ended up with Dolores Mitchell's items from the 19-teens and 20s. But Dolores Mitchell was a fixture at Boston games for at least 37 years. She, in 1940, a May 2nd issue of the Boston Globe called her the Queen of Baseball, showed her handing a piece of gum to the Chicago White Sox pitcher Monty Stratton in that issue. 2 weeks later, the Portland Evening News reported that she'd been going to Boston games since 1903, so that's where they get the 37 years from. Dolores Mitchell sat in the box seats near third base dugout. She gave candy to players and talked to them all, so somehow knew them all. She was a huge fan. She scored all 4 games of the 1914 World Series when the Braves beat the heavily favored Philadelphia Phillies, which any Boston fan could be satisfied with. She also had a scorebook from the Game 1 of the 1915 World Series, pictured here. She had all 5 games scored of the 1915 World Series. The Red Sox won that World Series. Babe Ruth got his first World Series at bat. He did go hitless in that game, but she's got the scorebook from that, which is really cool. She also scored in the 3 Boston games in the 1916 World Series, games 1, 2, and 5. The Red Sox won that World Series again. Babe Ruth went 0 for 5 in that World Series. He was still mostly a pitcher in 1916. In 1917, August 10th, I think it was, she had a scorebook from that game. Babe Ruth hit his first home run of the season. He only hit 2 home runs that season, and it was only his 8th career home run in his 3rd full season. So remember, Babe Ruth didn't become a power hitter until 1918, when he led the league with 11 home runs. But in 1917, hit his 2nd home run late in the season, or his first home run of the season, late in the season. And Dolores noted at the top of the scorecard, which you'll see here, that it was the longest home run ever hit at Fenway Park. And the local newspaper, I think it was the Boston Globe, noted the same thing the next day, that it just kept going and going and going. And Ty Cobb was the outfielder, and he just collapsed on the field as soon as he saw it was hit. It's pretty cool how it just ties up. You can see she noted that it was the longest home run ever, and then the local Boston paper said the same thing the next day. All of these postcards from Bill Kerrigan were to Dolores. They were somehow friends or attached somehow. They knew each other very well. There were a lot of them. She also had 25 free tickets to the Red Sox games in 1915. Just a ticket book, complimentary ticket book, which is pretty neat. So Dan Adams, the guy who found this in the trunk, contacted an auction house about 20 years ago. So at that point it'd be like 30 years after he found it. He wanted to sell it. But the auction houses didn't really know what to do with it. How do you assess the value of a product that has hundreds and hundreds of signatures, including a bunch of Hall of Famers, all in one book? And you really can't. You can get estimates, you can talk to your big purchasers, but Dan ultimately was not happy with their estimated value of it, and he said, I can be patient, I don't need to sell it. So he hung on to it. He did sell over the years. He sold little pieces of the memorabilia from there. Like he sold an unscored program from a game in the 19-teens because the buyer, who paid $1,500 for it, wanted to see a scorebook with a guy's name in it, Dan McKee, I think the name was, that he was familiar with. So the guy paid $1,500 for it. So Dan Adams calls himself a collector. He's still got all this stuff, or a lot of it. He still has the Who's Who of Baseball book with all the autographs. He said that the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, or Baseball Hall of Fame, wanted him to donate it to them, but he's concerned that they would just put it on display between a glass case and only have it open to the Babe Ruth page, and he wants people to appreciate the whole book. So he says he's not trying to get rich from selling the book, but he wants it to go to people who will really appreciate the history of the book and not just display the Babe Ruth page, which I guess is understandable if you believe that he's not holding on to it for money, which seems reasonable. In Dan's house, he has a 1952 Seaberg jukebox which is really neat. He's obviously a collector of vintage items. He also has a 1950s era pinball machine, a vintage pay telephone, hangs on his wall, and it works. Neat. His life partner, Jennifer, has a ticket from Game 5 of the 1956 World Series. If you're familiar with World Series history, you know that Game 5 was when Don Larson pitched the only perfect game in World Series history. So that they have a ticket stub from that game is amazing. I have no idea what that might be worth. If you know, let me know in comments. Let me know in comments, what is your favorite item here? Were you aware of this story? Would you be interested in buying that Who's Who in Baseball book? And how much would you pay for it? I'd be curious. Attic Find Friday is my weekly series. I've been doing this for about 3 months now, maybe a little bit more, 4 months. Every Friday, I do a find of really neat things. If you're new here, or if you just haven't subscribed yet, click that subscribe button, because I have dozens and dozens more lined up for the foreseeable future. All these Fridays, you'll be getting an Attic Find Friday. And I really appreciate it. Let me know in comments what you think. I hope you guys have a great weekend.